Welcome back to Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 5, The Road Well Traveled, Part 1, which includes Woman in White, Ghost or Angel, and Phantom Driver. Hopefully you're doing well tonight, and we'll see you at the end. Chapter 5, The Road Well Traveled. Urban legends are twice, at least, told tales, rumors that have circulated so efficiently that their content has been accepted as fact, whether it began that way or not. The spread of these stories is not only a fascinating phenomenon, but thankfully for lovers of ghostly lore, the tales frequently revolve around ghosts. Throughout history, legends have always served important cultural purposes. Today, because the vast majority of people live in urban centers, the modifier urban in the phrase urban legend has more to do with the events being contemporary than it does with the story taking place in a city, as we shall see in the following Washington-based tales. Many urban legends take place in rural settings, such as country roads, whether the manifestations appear in isolated rural locations or on busy city streets. Their stories make for thought-provoking reading. In our first story in Chapter 5 here, we find this story entitled Woman in White. A classic phantom hitchhiker story began to make the rounds just after the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Sightings of the roadside apparition, a lady in white, have been reported by some highly credible people, including Elizabeth Simpson of the University of Washington. She related an encounter experienced by her husband's young niece, Judy, who had been driving down the Olympic Peninsula just 4 months after the eruptions in May of 1980. The woman had stopped to fill her car's gas tank at a service station. The pump jockey was friendly, and the two began chatting. As they were saying goodbye, the attendant warned the woman not to pick up hitchhikers along the way, especially a woman in white. There's been a woman in a white dress hitchhiking her way up and down the I-5 corridor, he cautioned. She gets in the back seat and predicts that the volcano is going to erupt again between October 12th and 14th. Then she disappears. By the last week in September, the story of the Doomsday manifestation had made its way into the mainstream media. Many people reported they had stopped to pick up a traveler who met the specter's description. The entity's warnings were becoming more and more specific. The eruption, which was to occur in mid-October, would lay waste to a 100-mile radius. Even the local police were alerted to the possibility that motorists might report encountering a vision. Eventually, the sightings became less and less frequent until they stopped completely. Once her deadline of the middle of October had passed and her prediction had not come to fruition, the mysterious woman in white was not seen again. In our second of three stories, Ghost or Angel. Sorry, got a little frog in my throat. Gonna see if I can chase him away. Ghost or Angel. A supernatural being, much like the one described in the last story, began appearing the previous spring in the Mount Vernon area, considerably north of Mount St. Helens. A motorist reported picking up a female hitchhiker. She told him God is coming, and then before the man's eyes, she disappeared into a cloud of smoke. He was understandably shaken, and he reported the incident to the local police. After assessing the information, the officers concluded there were no facts, nothing to go on, so we dropped it. Even though half a dozen other drivers in the area had similar encounters, it was suspected that the vision was simply a figment of the drivers' imaginations. Not all of the authorities shared that assumption, though. For example, Reverend Paul Jacobson, minister of the Viewcrest Assembly of God in Mount Vernon, felt that the being was an angel, a messenger from God. Given the number of years that have now passed, it is likely that he will never know exactly who or what the disappearing hitchhiker really was. Of course, the image may have been the result of overactive imaginations, or it may have been an angel, but it seems to me that a strong argument could be made for it having been a ghostly apparition. Ghosts have a long history of being highly visible, one moment and gone the next, even if the spot where they had just been was inside a car, barreling non-stop down a highway. And in our third and final chapter for this episode, it is entitled Phantom Driver. In many regards, the following ghost story could be categorized as an interesting twist on that staple of urban legends. The Phantom Hitchhiker story, this one, however, is also remarkably different in a variety of ways. For one thing, the names of those involved in the ghostly encounter are known for certain, as are the time and place the events took place. And most importantly, in this story, the driver of the vehicle is the phantom. The hitchhikers are real people. What I believe we have here is a true ghost story, one that ends with many thoroughly bewildered people. To begin the tale, we must travel in our imagination to Seattle. The Seattle that existed for two 9-year-old friends, Ernie Poindexter and Meredith Wright, on September and Saturday in 1963, although summer was over and the school had started, thereby managing to ruin their fun from Monday to Friday. The two little boys still had the weekends to spend doing as they pleased. On that particular Saturday morning, what they wanted most of all was to go to a movie that was playing in a downtown theater. Life was not only simpler in those days, but safer. The lads thought nothing of standing at the curb with their thumbs out until a trucker stopped to give them a lift, despite the no riders sign that was clearly posted on the side of the truck's cab. The driver waved Ernie and Meredith over. "Jump in," he shouted over the noise of the engine. "I only have a couple more deliveries to make before I head downtown. I'll bet that's where you boys want to go, isn't it? To the Saturday afternoon movie." Nodding in enthusiastic agreement, the boys opened the truck's door and climbed in. Moments later, the truck, with the giggling boys in its cargo hold, pulled out onto the road again. They'd only gone a few blocks when the driver once again steered his vehicle over to the curb. Meredith and Ernie heard the driver turn off the truck's ignition and pull on the handbrake. Seconds later, the man opened the back gate and pulled out one of the cartons surrounding the boys. As he did, he assured Ernie and Meredith that he'd be right back. "Just this delivery and one other before we start downtown," the man told them. "By the way, my name's Phil Cullen." Being too young to realize that the man's introduction had been their cue to identify themselves, the boys merely smiled and nodded, indicating their silent agreement to wait patiently for Phil's return. As they waited, they heard what sounded like another truck pulling up directly behind them. To their horror, it came just seconds later that the second truck had slammed into one they were sitting in. The impact sent Phil's truck, with the boys helplessly trapped inside, hurtling down a steep hill. Packages and boys were roughly tossed around the back of the truck as the runaway vehicle sped along on what could only be a collision course with disaster. Terrified, the boys clung to each other. Suddenly, the truck lurched to the left and slowed somewhat. "Don't be scared, boys," yelled a man's disembodied and obviously stressed voice. "Just hang on tight. I'm trying to jam the brakes on." With eyes as big as saucers, the two youngsters stared at one another. What was happening? How could anyone have managed to get behind the wheel? Ernie, being the braver of the two, reached up and slid open the little window between the cab and the cargo hold. There was no one in the front of the truck, yet the steering wheel held straight and true as though guided by an invisible hand. At Ernie's urging, Meredith scampered up beside his friend and peered through the window. The boys watched in amazement as the horn rim in the steering wheel depressed itself and the horn blasted a warning to pedestrians. As it barreled down the hill, the vehicle swerved, first this way, then that, in order to avoid obstacles and certain calamity. Over and over again, the horn honked to warn pedestrians in the area. Eventually, when it reached the bottom of the hill, the delivery truck came to a safe stop. Moments later, terrified and breathless, Phil Cullen pulled open the back door to his vehicle. He could scarcely believe his eyes. There, sitting huddled together, were the two boys he had left in the back of the truck. Aside from being frightened, they were none the worse for wear. Soon, dozens of people were running to the truck, anxious to find out if there was any way they could help. All were certain that anyone inside the ill-fated truck would have been, at the very least, seriously injured. "Good thinking, lads," Phil declared. "If you hadn't steered that truck like you did, you might not have survived that little ride." When they finally found their voices, both Meredith and Ernie explained, as best they were able, that they hadn't steered the truck, that they'd been in the cargo bay where Phil had left them the whole time. For a moment the man merely stood, silent and still staring blankly in apparent disbelief. Then a bystander spoke up. "The boys are telling the truth," he said. "I watched the entire episode. No one was in the truck's cab." How did the truck make it down the hill without hitting anything?" asked Phil. "I don't know how to explain it, sir, but I can assure you that there was no one at the wheel. No one who could be seen anyway," the man added, shaking his head and walking away. And so, on that September Saturday in 1963, the lives of Ernest Poindexter and Meredith Wright and anyone in the path of the runaway truck were saved by a phantom. Hopefully you've enjoyed this Ghost Stories of Washington Chapter 5, The Road Well Traveled, Part 1. Woman in White, Ghost or Angel, and Phantom Driver. Until next time, with our next Ghost Stories of Washington episode, have a great and wonderful night, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now, and be wary of ghosts unawares. You all take care. Have a wonderful and blessed day, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.